and very happy to have Susanna Nicchiarelli here with us today. And I'm actually going to hand over to Susanna's niece, Sarah, who is a student here at Marymount, and she's going to be giving that. Sarah, over to you.
At first I didn't know what to say about Marymount, so I thought of all the adjectives that could describe her. Marymount is a nice person. She is kind, and sometimes she is funny and makes me laugh. As a mother, she is very caring. Then I thought of her job, and I couldn't find adjectives to describe it. But I remembered when I went with my grandpa to watch her direct her movie. I saw that she had people fixing the lights, and there was a car. My aunt had to make the people who would watch the movie think that there was a person in the back of the car who was looking around and seeing what happened. Instead, there was only the cameras filming. The cameras were the eyes of that person. This makes me think that when she writes the script, my aunt has an idea of what her movie will look like. But when she's creating it, it's not so easy. And sometimes she needs to change things from how they were in her mind. For me, this is very interesting but difficult. I always learn a lot from my aunt, and I enjoy my time with her. Tonight, I know that you will too. So I'm proud to present you Susanna Nicchiarelli, my aunt.
Thank you. I had no idea this was going to happen, so I'm going to start crying. And thank you. Well, it's important for me to be here, very important, because of course this was my school for 9 long years, the first 9 years. I mean, from when I was 4 to when I was 13. And I learned everything here. I mean, I think I owe Marymount 90% of the things I have achieved in my life. And also, even learning English here, of course, was important. But, well, here I studied music and theater and drama. And, of course, all that helped me a lot once I decided to pursue this career. Probably it also gave me more courage, because in this school, I mean, the feeling I had is, well, we all had, I think, and it's still like, it must be still like that, is that everything was possible. You could do anything. You could play any instrument or act or be a scientist. And so I think that this kind of freedom, I got this kind of freedom here, and the possibility, the fact that the sky was the limit. I could do whatever I wanted, and I could pursue my dreams, and that's certainly something I learned here. Apart from technical things, like for example, when I was in 6th grade, we with another classmate, we wrote a play and directed a play. And I don't know if you still have this tradition, but it was 6th graders would write and direct plays, and that was my first directing job. And it was really important, and the play was a big hit in Marymount. And also, of course, once I decided to pursue my dream of working in the movies, the first thing I did is I went to Los Angeles, and I was 24, and I was able to go to Los Angeles and work in a production company because I spoke English, because I had been to Marymount. If not, it would have been impossible. And I worked in this production company reading scripts and photocopying scripts and making coffee and things like that. But at the same time, that was a very important step, to go to Los Angeles. And well, I was thinking of just being very personal and explaining how I came to understand that I was going to do this job and what I was going to do. Because it's not only, I think there are many different ways of being a director, a film director. You can be a technical film director and just shoot films, and usually that's a good thing because you make a lot of money. Or you can be an author, try to be an author, so you have your own world and your own stories to tell, and that's much harder, and you make much less money. But it's more rewarding because it's like writing books, or it's your world that you're presenting to the audience. Of course, it's less commercial because usually commercial movies and industrial movies are done in a different way. They're more industrial. There are people that write, people that direct, people that edit, and producers supervising everything. While the idea of the European director, or also the American independent director, is that you conceive an idea and you write and you imagine and you bring your world to the screen and you bring your dreams on screen and you share them with people. And that's actually the hardest and most ambitious thing you can try if you're working in the movies, because it's usually less commercial, and it's like that, unfortunately. But that's what I decided to do. My big love was Woody Allen, and he wrote and directed his own movies, and I wanted to do something like that. At the beginning, I thought I was going to make funny movies. Then in the end, not really. But because life changes you, I think. And well, when I started I was in LA, and I was doing this internship in this production company, reading scripts, and I was following a couple of classes at UCLA. And I was following a directing class, and the problem is that we had to have an idea for a short, and I didn't have any ideas, and I just thought, my God, what am I going to do? Because I just wanted to do this job, but I didn't know. And I had this boyfriend I was trying to break up with, but I didn't have the courage to break up with him. And I kept on having these horrible dreams in which I was at parties with beautiful men, very handsome men, and he would come along, and he would be like this tall and have dresses with watermelons painted on them. But he would be my boyfriend in the dream, so I had to tell everybody that he was my boyfriend, and I was like really ashamed. But it's funny, but I actually had those dreams, and they were nightmares. So when we were trying to have ideas, and I was looking for ideas for my short, one night I had this dream again, that he was like really little and coming to a party. And I decided to make a short out of it, a short which I will not show you because it's horrible. But it was a great idea, and a lot of people liked it, and it went to a couple of very small festivals. But and I made it there in LA, and I think that with that short, I found what I had to say, which was it wasn't only making fun of him. I mean, in the end, it was a short about love, because in the end, I continued the main character of the short, which was me, because I was playing myself, of course, and she was having these dreams about her boyfriend being little and dressed in watermelons, and then she would talk to a friend about this, and her friend told her one day, well, you should love him for what he is, and you should learn how to love him for what he is. And then the short ended with us walking down on the beach, and he was wearing his watermelon dress, and he was little, and I was walking with him, but I loved him for what he was, for his being fragile. So it wasn't only, it was something about women and men, and the way women are supposed to see men, and the way men really are, because of course they are fragile, and it's important to recognize that and to love them anyway. I mean, that was more or less the sense of the short. And somehow from there everything started. And of course I can see in my first movies there were themes that were already in in that first short, which was called My Little Man. And so that's where it all started. Then it took a very long time from there to make one first real feature movie. It took me, I want to see the time because this is long. It took me, that was 99, and then I made my first movie in 2008. So 9 years of film school and then working on sets, working with directors. I worked a lot with Nanni Moretti. That was the most important, the most important encounter in my professional life. Because I left him two VHSs of my shorts, because I made another one in the meantime. I had made another one in the meantime. Well, the second one I made was called The Artist, and it was about my second boyfriend, the boyfriend I had afterwards, who was a painter. And actually he was so self-absorbed, and he was I broke up with him right after the short. He was a horrible guy, but he would paint himself and self-portraits all the time, and he would never really see me. That was my problem. And so I made a short about this, and the first scene was brilliant. I still think it was one of my best scenes, because the scene was me lying in a bed, and he was sketching something, and you would think by the way we were sitting down that he was sketching me. But then the camera would show what he was sketching, and he was sketching himself sitting on the bed. And that was the beginning of the short. So again, it was man, woman, and irony. And I strongly believed, I still believe that women have a particular sense of humor that hasn't been on screen enough yet. Of course, Woody Allen has explored all the possibilities of quirky male humor, but I still think that there are so little female directors, and we have so much to say. It's also a question of quantity. There have been so little female directors, such a small number up to now, and we have a lot of things to say. And of course, we have our own sense of humor, I think. So then from there, I went to film school, and I don't know if I'm doing this right. It's okay. I'm just telling the story of my life. From there, I went to film school, and I worked a lot. I did a lot of. I worked on sets, and I did backstages, and I worked for Nanni Moretti. I was saying I left him the VHS with my two shorts, and in the meantime I had done a PhD in philosophy, actually, and working on the 17th century, which is really weird. And people in the business, when they know that I did a PhD on Spinoza, they look at me as if I was some weird person. But I did these two things at the same time because I was really very good in school, and I couldn't have stopped studying. So I continued. I graduated in philosophy. I got a PhD. And I was also a little ashamed of this dream about being in the movies, because it was as if it was something less important than studying and teaching and studying philosophy and things like that. But then in the end, I just couldn't help it. I wanted to do this, and I gave up philosophy. But of course, Nanni Moretti was very impressed by my CV, because I had this PhD in Spinoza and Descartes. And he called me, and I worked with him, and he produced a documentary that I directed. So that's how I started working, doing little things, and then going to film school, and I would shoot also wedding movies to earn money, and in the meantime I just wrote scripts, and writing scripts was writing is something that I really like, so I would have ideas and write scripts and then have people read them, but nobody wanted to make my movies up to a certain point. And then I think something happened. There is something that clicks at some point. You grow up, and things just become deeper and more serious because of life events. And so I wrote my first script that was made into my first movie, where I think I put a depth that I hadn't put into anything I had done up to that point. And I made my first movie at 33, which is an important age. And it was, well, the idea, actually, I put together a few events of my personal life because I had a cousin. That reminded. I mean, I put a few characters of my life in the film, but then I had an idea about history. Well, the interesting thing is that having grown up in an American school, I thought that basically Americans had landed on the moon, and that was all. I didn't know that Russians had done a lot of things before, because in the 80s, in an American school in the 80s, Russians were certainly never mentioned, I mean, or very little. And so I didn't know anything about Yuri Gagarin being the first man in space and Laika being the first dog in space. I just knew about the moon. And when I went, during my film school years, I went on a trip to Russia, and I went in this museum, this cosmonaut museum, because Russians actually had a different way of calling astronauts. Astronauts were cosmonauts for the Russians. And I discovered all this. And it was very interesting, because I realized that during the Cold War, and that means also in the years of my childhood, there had been two totally parallel cultures that didn't touch each other in any way. And I saw this newspaper that was an Italian newspaper from the 60s that had a title that said, Soviet technology defeats the law of gravity. And I found it so inspiring, because it was, and I decided that I was going to make a movie about the other side, the side of the Soviets, the Italians being on the side of the Soviets, so the communists, since I had grown up in a completely different context. When I grew up here, those were the years of Ronald Reagan, so it was completely different. And I put the characters that I had met in my life, I put them in that historical context, and I worked on that. And that's how Cosmonaut came out. And, well, I'll show you the first scene, which was, I don't know how many people saw Cosmonaut, actually. Has any of you seen it? No. I'm going to show you the first scene, which was, like, one of the best scenes of the film. You need subtitles? Should I put English subtitles? No, just a second. I didn't think about it, sorry. No. Come li metto? Title? Well, you need... Well, there's only Italian subtitles. No, English subtitles. So this was the beginning of my first movie. And, well, the theme, I think, apart from, of course, the relationship between brother and sister, she's a little sister and her big brother is a weird guy. I mean, he's very intelligent, but at the same time, he doesn't make many friends, and she's kind of ashamed of him. And it's all about this relationship between this young sister and this bigger brother. Then eventually he has a problem. He is epileptic, so she is ashamed of him because he's sick, and he's sick in front of other people. And of course, history goes on in a parallel way, and the film ends in 1963 when the first woman, because the Soviets sent the first woman in space, which nobody else has done yet. I mean, the only woman that went alone in space was a Soviet woman, and she was Valentina Tereshkova. And that's the moment when Luciana, the girl that you see now who is 8 years old, she is in the film, she's, for most of the film, she's 15. This is just the beginning. Luciana actually finds the courage to go and save her brother. I mean, it's a long story, so. But, and it's somehow, it's as if history would, I mean, I realized as I was writing it, and then I think that's one of the reasons why I got it made, because it was so special is the way history and real people intersect, the way your childhood is influenced by history. So that was, it's also a question of the generation I belong to, because when in 1989, when the Berlin Wall fell and everything changed, I was 14 years old, and everything really changed in 6 months. And also the words we used changed, and the things, everything we were used to. And it was interesting because with the students, the actors who were very young, of course, I had to explain to them certain things because they had no idea what we were talking about. Because, of course, they were 15 years old and they were talking about communism and they had no idea. Also, they spent a lot of time, these kids spent a lot of time in the headquarters, in the party headquarters, which was something the kids that shot this film in 2008 had no idea of what it could be. So it was very interesting, and it was really fun to do a period movie. And since then, because it was set in the 60s, and since then I've done all the time period films because it's much more interesting, I think, because when you're working on a film with other people and you have to pretend that you're in a different time, it's really fun. And creatively, it's very stimulating. And I think it's very fun for the audience, too, because when darkness falls and then you're projected 40 years before, 50 years before, 100 years before. That's the new project I'm working on. It's set in the 1880s. So, and that's a magic that only cinema can do, which I think is very special. Well, TV can do that, of course, too, but it's not the same thing because you're in your house. Well, when you're in a theater and then the lights go down, and then you're actually really traveling in time. About the relationship, I think it would be nice to show you very fast there's a lot of things I would like to show. Well, I'll show you another scene which is really funny from this movie. Okay, so this guy, the character's name is Angelo. That's Luciana. It's the little girl at the beginning of the movie. She has grown up and she's 15 now. And he is, he's really in love with her. And of course she doesn't care. So I'm going to show you this scene because it's interesting because of the way we shot it, because it was totally improvised. And we had, it was not like that on the script, but rehearsing with the actors themselves had a few ideas, and then we put them on film the way they conceived it. And it was fun. You will notice it's also one shot. I mean, usually when you watch TV or more traditional commercial cinema, it's very rare that you have a dialogue all told in one shot. While here, the camera is fixed, and it's just the two kids, and they're acting, and the camera is not moving, and it's not changing points of view. And it's because I wanted this embarrassment to come out from the actors, and that's something that you usually do in more experimental auteur films and not very commercial films. And I'm very proud of this scene, which I still think is one of the best scenes I did. And then I'm going to show you a short. Well.
I socialisti, tutti quei traditori che se ne vanno con i socialisti.
Can we raise the volume a little bit? Can everybody hear?
Yes.
Ok, no, vabbè. Ok, va bene, va bene.
Te?
Non
No.
diciamo che ti costa tanto un bacio.
Oh no, me l'hai chiesto pure l'altra volta e ti ho detto no.
Sì, vabbè, l'altra volta. Ma l'altra volta quando?
Oh, me l'hai chiesto 100 volte. 100 volte non ho detto di no. Basta.
Sì, 100 volte. 100 volte è esagerato, devo dire. È esagerato proprio. Vabbè, 100 volte. Prendo il bacio.
No. Però senza lingua.
I problemi dei transmettori possono essere sia libri che solidi. Poi la camera è una questione. La spinta al transmettore.
Sto vivendo con te i miei primi tormenti, le mie prime felicità, da quando l'ho conosciuto, e me più dolce non c'è.
Vabbè. Another important thing that I did in this movie and that I did also in Nico and is using archive footage, real archive footage, inside a fiction film, which I always like, even as a spectator, because I think the audience is much more intelligent than what we think. And the audience knows that they're assisting to something fake with actors, but at the same time, if you remind them with the archive material of reality and of history, and of the fact that these things have really happened, I think it's a very interesting way to make people think, which should be our first objective. So not only entertain, but also give an occasion to think. And the other thing I wanted to say is about the music. That was really important because I took the 60s songs and we redid them with a band that has since then always done the music of my films. And that's also another way to make people think, in my idea, is that the song is not the original song from the 60s, but they recognize the song, but it's different at the same time. And that, I think, puts your brain in movement. Also because somehow you re-listen to it again, as if it was the first time. And another interesting thing, what Sara said before made me think about it here, is that those details of him putting the powder in the rocket were shot 6 weeks later than the scene on the terrace. We shot them in a hospital, and it was like the last day of shooting. And of course I was on my first film, and I was desperate that we hadn't shot those details. And everybody kept on telling me, don't worry, the details, we do them wherever we want. And I couldn't accept this. I thought everybody's going to understand that they're done later, and they're not. And myself, I forget often that we did them 6 weeks later. And it's really one of the most incredible things about cinema. And that time time and space are completely arbitrary. You just recreate it in your film. I always had another passion, which is animals and animals talking. That's something that makes me always laugh a lot as a spectator. And when I was doing the research for this film, I learned that there was that the Soviets, before sending the first man in space, had sent a series of small rockets with animals inside that died in space. Until finally, they sent the Sputnik number 5. And they were 2 dogs, a few rats, and a few mice and insects, came back alive. And that was the first success of the Soviet space race. And then after that, they sent Yuri Gagarin, like 6 months later. So I decided to make a movie about these mice and dogs. And I made one of the 2 animation shorts that I have made in my career. And animation is really interesting and fun to do because you create from zero, and you create your characters. It's not the same thing as casting. You say, okay, I want a mouse, I want him fat, with long whiskers, and they just make him the way you want him. And then you build the sets. And the film was done in stop motion. I don't know if you're familiar with like Shaun the Sheep or Wallace and Gromit. They're puppets. Well, now, of course, there's a lot of help from the digital. But they're puppets that are actually photographed. Every little movement is and it took them to do my short, 8. In one day, they shot 8 seconds. Because, of course, you have to take, you have your puppets and you move them, and you have to take a lot of pictures to show the movement. And then, so it was a very long shooting for this short. And I was very proud because it went to Venice with the film. We had produced it with my brother. We did this little, when I decided I was gonna be a director, he said, why don't we do this small film company, which of course was very small. And when we asked for funding for an animation short, and we got the funding, but it was a very small production. And in the end, it was shown at the Venice Film Festival. And the idea that I had also, thanks to the animators who are a studio in Trastevere. I don't know if anybody's heard of them. They're called Bertani Cinque. They're really excellent. They do a lot of things for kids too. So they had this idea of making the animals talk in the language of animals and put subtitles for the dialogues. And I was so proud because on the catalog, on the Venice, Mostra di Venezia catalog, they have to put the original language and then the subtitles. And for my short, it said, original language, linguaggio degli animali. And then subtitles in English and Italian. And I was very proud of this. So I wanted to show you that short also for the younger ones, if it's... And of course, it ended up in the extras of the DVD. This is our production company, Nicchia Film. interrupted because we don't have much time left. I would go on for hours. But come lo tiro fuori questo? Because I have to put the other one inside. And no, while I was watching it, I was thinking about losers. I mean, people that lose in history, and somehow it's a theme that fascinates me. And the fact that rat says one day a Soviet rat will be walking on the moon. And of course, it's not true. It didn't happen. I find it so fascinating. It's about humanity, about how everything is so relative, and everything that seems so important and absolute in the moment, then just a few years later is funny and ridiculous if you say it again. And also the fact about I'm attracted by those stories that are not the stories of those who won. And in the case of my third film, I've made 3 films, but it would be too long to talk to you about the second one, which was from a novel, and it was the one that had least success. So it's I would have a lot of interesting things to show you, but there's not enough time. And for my third film, well, I also had a big disappointment because the first film was a big success and it won a lot of prizes, and I traveled around the world and I was invited to juries and I hope this works because this is a trial, because the DVD doesn't exist yet of the film. It's coming out in 2 weeks, and this is the trial I got at home. It should work. And I had a big disappointment with my second film because it wasn't a success as much as the first one. And I had gotten used to it, to going to winning prizes and things like that. And it wasn't even an insuccess. It was just something in the middle. So, and that was a disappointment for me. And I realized, I think something clicked in me again at that point. And I realized that, well, I had tried to do something that was more commercial. I had a very famous actress working in it, and it was from a novel that had sold a lot of copies, and it was the idea was of the producer, and a lot of things. And then I realized I had written the story of Nico just after finishing shooting my first film. And I realized that I was not going to go there. I was not going to try to do commercial films and just find myself in the middle, because I was eventually, even if I tried to do commercial films, I was going to try to put myself into them, and something in the middle would come out, which was not commercial and not even artistic enough to go to festivals and win prizes. And at the same time, the second film is something I totally identify with, and it deals with the same themes, memories and history and time passing, and it has a huge thing about time passing, and that's why I accepted to do that novel, because it's about a woman who, using a telephone, she actually communicates with herself as a child, and she tries to change the course of history and save her father's life. I still think it was a great story, and I like the film, and I like the result. But at the same time, I realized that that I had to be braver and do something maybe more difficult, but then much more original. And I had this story about Nico. Nico was, the young ones, of course, don't know, but Nico was a singer of the Velvet Underground, and she sang in 1966 in the concerts and in the first album of the Velvet Underground, which is the one with the banana that Andy Warhol designed. And it was totally an idea of Andy Warhol. He put her there, and she sang, and the others of the band didn't really want her. Lou Reed, who was the leader of the Velvet Underground, didn't want this woman, and he was actually quite annoyed by her because Andy Warhol had told him, you're not charismatic enough, so you need somebody. And he put this woman who was a model because she was very pretty, and he put her in the group, and she sang. She was German, and so in the end, after the experience of the Velvet Underground, which was actually the most important thing she did in her career because it's the one she's known for, she left and she left New York and she started writing her own music. And she actually made very interesting music by herself. She wrote the soundtrack of the films of Philippe Garrel, who is an experimental French director. She made great records that influenced a lot of the music that came afterwards, but of course less known. And she lived actually the best part of her life in this second moment after the most famous and known part, when she wasn't that pretty anymore. She was a woman who had been famous for being very pretty, and what she did is that on purpose she changed her image. She dyed her hair black. She started dressing in black, and she didn't care about becoming old. When old, I mean, she was 30 and then 40, but she didn't care about time passing. On the contrary, she wanted to erase the image of that 25-year-old top model that she had been. And I found this character fascinating in many ways because somehow she was somebody who had lost. Because she had lost all the fame that she had had when she was young. But at the same time, it's by reading about her, I realized that life was not about success and insuccess. Life is something much more complicated, thank God. And it's not only... Because when you're doing this job, it's very difficult. And, of course, the experience of my second movie, but also in my first movie, I had disappointments and things that had disappointed me, and you always have higher expectations than what you actually get. I mean, that's normal. If you get the Oscar, then you wanted probably if you get the Oscar, that's fine. But until you get there, then everything you get is never enough. And you realize that you have two alternatives when you're pursuing a career like this one. Either you're unhappy all your life, or you actually start being happy with what you have. and Nico was somebody who was happy with what she had. That was my feeling. Of course, she was on drugs and her life was a mess. But that's the feeling, the positive feeling she gave me. And I found it interesting the way that everybody kept on asking her about her past. In a nostalgic way. So again, the relationship with time, that clicked something in me, and that's why I wanted to make this film about her. Also, the film is set in the 80s, so again, it was a period film. At a certain point in the film, they go on the other side of the Iron Curtain, they go to Prague, and she gives this concert in Prague. They have a problem, since they have to pass the border with Eastern Europe, she can't bring her drugs to Eastern Europe, and she's forced to do her concert without having her dose of heroin. And suddenly it's the first concert that goes really well. And from there she decides to stop heroin. This is true because that's what Nico did in the 80s. She quit with drugs, and so that's more or less the most important part of the film that maybe we could watch if you have another 5 minutes. And of course this film has given me, so far it has been giving me the best satisfactions, but also that's another thing I owe to Marymount, is that the film was shot in English. Well, what is interesting, I think, is that I realized I had written the story without even thinking that it was an international film. I just liked Nico's story, and I didn't even think that it was not an Italian film. And because I'm so used to having come to this school, and then I studied abroad, and I'm so used to thinking in terms in international terms, because that's my identity. I don't feel only Italian. So I wrote this movie, and then at some point when I found the producers, I changed producers, we realized that it was going to have to be shot in English, and it was going to have to be shot around Europe, and we were going to have an international cast. And of course it wasn't easy to put up a movie like that, but that was the big difference, because all of a sudden I shot this movie in English. I sold it we sold it all over the world. It's coming out in the States in August, which is, I mean, it happens very rarely that an Italian film is sold in the States. I mean, the opposite, of course, happens all the time. So it was, and it got wonderful reviews from the international press. So it was a really huge satisfaction. Of course, not enough, because I always want more, but it was good. And I think, of course, I was able to do this also because of my international background. And what scene should I show you? I mean, the Prague scene. It's the best scene. And no, it could be interesting also to see the first interview. Well, I'll just show you really fast the first interview and then the Prague scene, just to show you where she starts and then where she goes from there. And again, in the first interview, you will see there is the choice of, again, in the beginning, I used the archive footage, which is archive footage of New York. Again, there is the theme of history, because Nico was born in 1938, and she grew up in Nazi Germany, and she witnessed the end of Nazi Germany with the bombing of Berlin. And that was, of course, something that she talked about all the time, and it was part of her identity, and it was so strong. And also, she felt that a lot about Jews. Every time she dealt with somebody who was Jewish, she had to say that her father was actually in the German resistance, which wasn't true. But she would make this up just because she was so embarrassed about being German. And I found this a very interesting element of her character because of the generation she belonged to, which is the generation of my parents, the generation that was born just before the Second World War and that grew up during the Second World War. And somehow they lived through the Cold War, and she died 1 year before the end of the Cold War, because she died in 1988, so she didn't see the end. She didn't see her country reunited, because Germany was divided into two countries. And for her, the war was never over. So, and I also found that fascinating in her story. And I'll show you the beginning, and then the Prague scene. It'll actually ruin the film for you. I mean, stopping it all the time, but so I can talk over it. This is the archive material. This archive material was shot by a director, a Lithuanian director who lived in the 60s in New York. His name is Jonas Mekas, and he's always been my passion ever since I was a student. And I knew I wanted to use archive material in this film, and I wrote him an email. He's 97 now, and I wrote him an email. It was 11 in the evening, and I said, well, I went on his website and I wrote him, and I said, I'm making this film about Nico. And he answered me 15 minutes later. And he said, of course you can use my material. Well, I had to pay for it, but he's, of course, but. And this is the archive footage that I used in the film to remember the moment in which Nico was famous.
I
So here we are with Lou Reed's Femme Fatale.
Don't call me that. I don't like it.
So we're all really proud that a big star like you is living here in Manchester and not in Paris or New York.
Well, this city reminds me of Berlin after the war, when it was all in ruins, and I like that.
Yeah. So, do you want to tell us something about your experience with Alumna?
No, I don't. I started making my own music after the experience with the Velvet Underground in 1968, and it was Jim Morrison's idea. He asked me to write down my dreams, and
1968? I mean, that was like almost 20 years ago.
yeah, that's right.
I mean, those must have been some of the best days of your life.
Well, we took a lot of LSD. That was what we did.
So there is actually, I'm glad you laughed, because there is a lot of humor in this film, even if, and what I realized, which is really interesting, is that Italians don't laugh that much when they watch the film, and Scandinavians laugh really a lot. So I realized that my humor is Scandinavian. No, but it was. I was sitting both at the premiere in New York and at the Tribeca Film Festival, and also in London, and everybody laughed a lot. So it's because there is some kind of humor, which is not direct. It's very. While in Italy it was perceived, I think, as a much more dramatic movie, which is okay, but I also, I think, put something else in there. And I'm going to show you this concert. Of course, it was very tiring and difficult to shoot, especially the concerts, because we had to record the songs first. You can't shoot music live. I thought you could, which was very naive of me, because it's impossible. You have to shoot in playback always, unless you keep the same shot and you're sure you're going to edit only that. Because if not, you can't edit live pieces together. So we had to record in studio first, and then we had to do these playbacks, but at the same time I wanted to do and then we had the extras and we had the audience, and the days we shot the concerts were terrible, really difficult. And the actress, the choice of the actress was one of the best choices I made in my life, probably, because she's a great actress, but she's also a great woman, and she helped me a lot. Actors have to be also intelligent people, and because they can help you a lot with the character and with the script. And we actually rewrote some scenes with her, and it was a collaboration. The problem was also that Nico could be very easily, the audience, it was hard for the audience to relate with Nico because she took drugs and she was a horrible person and she was nasty and she would talk back, and I needed an actress that could make her empathic anyway. That could give her a humanity, and that's really, that's something that only good actors can really do, give a depth to the character, and she did that. And also it's very difficult, unfortunately, with women, and that's not, of course, our fault. That's the system's fault, that it's very difficult for a woman to really put herself so much into something and not be afraid of how she looks, or how others may perceive her, or of ending her career. Trina, for example, she's 43. No, she's not 43. She's like 45 now, but when we shot, she was 44, and she wasn't at all worrying about playing a 50-year-old woman. She said, "Don't put makeup on me so I look worse. Don't." She was really dealing with her image. That's also because she's Danish. I mean, she's Scandinavian, and they really have a wonderful school there, and they really put themselves into it. And beauty is really not the issue. She always says, even in interviews, I noticed she says that all the time, that the last thing that an actor has to be is to be vain. I mean, vanity. She says, I save my vanity for the red carpet, and then when I'm acting, that's something that helped a lot, because women are usually told, I mean, the problem with women characters is that they're never totally real, because there is something, either men tell them in an idealized way, or we ourselves put limits to the way we show female characters. And there is still a lot to say even on this point of view, and I wanted this Nico to be the way Nico was. I mean, somebody who didn't take showers and who threw up in the street when she was sick and didn't care. Well, now this looks horrible. It's not, I mean, the movie is not so horrible. So I'm going to show you when she sings, and then you'll know what I mean. So she really doesn't want to go to this concert. This is an illegal concert, and she doesn't want to do this. And she doesn't care that she's in Prague, that she's in Eastern Europe, that these people are risking their lives to see her perform. Her only concern is that her manager didn't get her the drugs. There's another thing which is important, that I did a lot of research for this film. I traveled around Europe. I met the real people. I met the real person this character is inspired by, and all the characters that aren't here, except for Nico, who died in 1988. I met them, even her son. So I did a lot of research, and then I put in these characters, the elements that I found, interviewing them, and also I made up a lot of things, of course.
Hey, Liz. Sam. Come.
So the difficulty of the scene, I just want to say this, is that she was supposed to not to care at the beginning, and then during the concert, she was supposed to gather the energy and the strength and undercome a major change. So that's why I wanted the actress to sing the songs, really, and it's her voice, it's not Nico's voice, because for me, the songs were moments of acting, which were very important. And here she changes throughout the song, if you notice it. So this was shot. I had a Steadicam operator on the stage with her turning around, and we did it 4 or 5 times, and then we intercut. And you haven't seen the movie, but the rest of the movie, up to here, all concerts are fixed. The camera is not moving, and so when this moment comes, it's a liberation also because the camera is finally moving when she's singing, and well, that's all. I mean, I'm sorry, I went over time. If you have any questions, we have some time, don't we?
Sure, we can.
Like 5 minutes.
Questions? If anyone has a question?
Yes.
I just, when you were at school, did you have this vision that this was where you were going to be, or is it something that's evolved? And you talked about getting a certain amount of confidence from Marymount, but as you progressed through life, did your vision of what you wanted to do become clearer?
Well, it was not only confidence. I mean, it's also, well, first of all, the fact that being able to perform any kind of art was not, was something possible. I mean, I was saying singing, acting, you do everything in here. So somehow it's not only confidence, it's also a question of freedom. You know, looking, it becomes normal that you look for artistic ways to express yourself, whereas I think in other contexts people are not taught to express themselves in different ways like that. While here, you know, maybe you sang out of tune, but everybody sang. And nobody made fun of you if you sang out of tune. That was just part of the way of dealing with the world, of trying to communicate, to show yourself. So that's basically, I think, what I learned here. And also the fact of waking up one day and saying, this is my dream. I don't think I would have ever had the courage if I hadn't come to a school like this one, because somehow it is really ridiculous to wake up one day and say, I want to make movies. I mean, it's really, it does. If you look at yourself from the outside, you're like, what? Where are you going? I mean, it's something that very few people actually manage to do, especially the way I am trying to, which is not... so saying, I have something to say, that's the whole point. I have something to say, and the world will care, which that already is a big step. And this is something I think that I learned here, that the world would care about what I had to say, which is huge. I mean, it's not only confidence, I think. Then, of course, you also learn a lot of skills here, and that you bring, you know, acting skills, music, a lot of things that I brought with myself in this job. And I still know that I know much more about music, though I haven't had at all a musical. I didn't take any, I mean, I didn't study music ever, but I studied it. All I know about music, I studied it here. And when we were working on these songs, for example, but always on the music of my films, I can tell that there are skills that I learned here that most of the people don't have. So it's not only confidence, it's a lot of things. But also I think that living in a context in which, well, I was saying before the 80s, you know, the 80s was a particular moment, the Cold War, and history was very present for us in this school. I mean, there was a moment in which we started having a police car at the gate, and a few days before there wasn't any police car, and because things changed, things were changing. There were the terrorist attacks, and these things were going on here a lot. We felt that a lot because there were children from around the world and different identities. Now it's normal. I mean, my daughter, she goes to an Italian public school, and in her class everybody comes from everywhere. So it's, but in the 80s it was not like that in Italian, I think, public schools. While here history was very present in many ways. And that too probably made me want to make movies about these themes, because I think in my childhood, also because I was here, a lot of historical events were important. Some directly, unfortunately, some indirectly.
Be very quick. Did you go to a film school after your experience?
Yes, I went to the Centro Sperimentale.
The Centro Sperimentale. But you studied philosophy as well. I mean, you know that you do a PhD.
I studied philosophy. I did the PhD, and then I went to the Centro Sperimentale when I was 25.
Right.
Yeah, I studied for a huge amount of time. Yeah. The Centro Sperimentale is a school where it's very difficult to enter. They take 6 people a year in directing. First they take 12 people, and then after 2 months they kick out half, which is horrible. Those were the worst 2 months of my life. And but it's and what is good about the Centro Sperimentale compared to the rest of the world, all the other film schools around the world, is that it's public. So you just pay taxes, which is very little, and then they actually fund your shorts, and you have wonderful possibilities because you shoot on film. Well, not anymore, I think, but we could shoot on film, and we had theaters and equipment, and everything was free because it's a state school, which is good. It's very difficult to get in, and it doesn't necessarily mean that you're talented if you get in. Sometimes it's just luck. But that was the lottery I won. I mean, with Centro Sperimentale, that was really important as an experience. And then working. Is that it? Yeah. Thank you. I hope I did it right.